Hello, everyone. We're going to talk about crypto, market, Olympics, AI, everything that you want to know that is happening in the world today. And I've got here with me William Remore. Hello, William.
Hey, mate, how are you?
Good. So I work with artificial intelligence and present yourself, William.
Yeah, so I work in the blockchain space and with fintech and doing some interesting and some less interesting stuff, but every day is a little bit different.
Yeah, we're not financial advisors just to start, but we're going to be talking about a lot of crap. So yeah, stay here with us. I think you're going to enjoy it. So I saw some interesting news, Guilherme, this week, William, this week about a new LLM model for generation of image called Flux. It's open source. It seems like they're gonna have sort of three different versions. So there's the cheapest version is open source. You can use it, you can share it, you can do anything that you want. You can build your own applications. There's like a intermediate one where you can use for internal usage, but you can't sell. And then there's like an advanced one that you need to pay license and is for companies to build things and whatever. But the interesting thing here is that the open source one, the open source community can do whatever they want. So what's going to be the future in the limits of generating image? Because the quality is really good. Does that mean that people will start like generating like fake images like they already do with no control, no censorship?
And is it like only for static images, or is it also like for video generation?
They will have video generations. It's on the roadmap, but right now it's just images. But imagine like, I don't know, like art content, like shit like that. Like imagine people generating like plus like 16 or 18 plus images.
I can see a lot of like that kind of stuff happening, where even people like in the Web3 or crypto community, NFT projects and so on, kind of like starting kind of using some of those models, because there is already quite a few artists there participating, but when you have like an open source model where people kind of like in hack build things on top of it, potentially fork and do something completely different that actually the project actually didn't imagine. I think that's the exciting and interesting part of it.
I think it's gonna be a bit crazy knowing that, because if we think about LLMs and just the major players in the market right now, like OpenAI with DALL-E 3 and Sora, like all those big players and Meta, and you name it, Google with Gemini and etc. They are regulated. So there are governments that are working with them, like in Europe or in the US or whatever, to regulate some of the work that they're doing, and they're trying to apply safe AI and etc. But once you go into open source on something that powerful, how do you control it? You don't.
But do you actually control the actual open AIs of the world? I mean, there's an argument here that, who actually controls Google? They go and give them fines and do that kind of stuff. But
yeah, but they can shut down the company if they want, right?
Well, they could, but there's no incentive, right? Because these are like global champions.
Yeah, so Sam Altman is gonna be in the chair of the government making the decisions of
eventually, right?
Of AI. Well, he will be. Yeah. It's non-news.
Yeah, so eventually some of those guys are going to be there, just kind of actually doing the frameworks, I suppose, of how is it that we are going to kind of like create some surveillance to making sure that actually that doesn't touch their bottom lines. There's not financial advice, by the way. It's just like, just my opinion here.
Which is really interesting, because if we look at OpenAI, like at the moment, like they're the biggest player in the market, right? Everyone is leaving OpenAI because they have all these concerns about security and sort of the way where OpenAI is targeting, like trying to release things that are maybe not that secure. And I'm using my own words here, like I don't work for OpenAI, but then if you start hiring people from the government, working with the government, and then sitting in the government with the policymakers, to make the decisions of what safe AI means, that's a bloody good strategy, right? Like, you don't actually need to be safe if you are the one making the decisions of what safe means.
Yeah, of course. That's the point, right? You like, if you get to a point where everybody just, I guess, trusts you because you've been building this tech, and kind of like almost like it's, I've seen so much of that stuff, especially in the venture capital world, where you have like the startups and so on. Some guys just raise tons of money by making things complicated. And then actually the VC is like, I have no clue what this guy is doing.
But it sounds cool.
But it sounds really great. And therefore I'm going to just throw a bucket of money into him because he looks smart. There's an argument that Sam Altman can just go and say like, oh, deal with a bunch of like, boomers that have absolutely no clue what is it that he is doing. He's just going, it's like, oh, just, trust me because I know this shit and you guys don't. So actually, what's your alternative anyways? And they say like, yeah, okay, actually you sound quite smart. And you start polished because then they work on communications and all that kind of stuff. So he actually polishes and sounds a little bit less of like a 30-year-old dude and more of a kind of like to the same level of those guys. And they eventually say like, yeah, I'll give you a pass. And then he goes, it's like, yeah, thanks very much. I'll take the pass and I'll just build the stuff actually that works for me and actually rate the barriers of the market for everybody else.
And it's funny to see, like, if you see those guys like Sam, and then if you look at sort of talking about companies like Microsoft and Google and Meta, like the biggest players.
Yep.
In the past, we had this big view of IBM is like the guys on suits, and Microsoft used to be seen as that as well. And then Google were like the cool guys. But all those companies now feel like the grandpas. And now we have like this view now that, like Meta is becoming a bit cooler. What's the guy, what's the name of the guy that runs Meta again?
Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg, like surfing and tan.
Yeah. He changed his style.
Hair, his style change. And then you have this guy like Sam Altman, like he doesn't even care like what clothes he's wearing, and like they becoming the cool guys now, the cool players in the tech market.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot of that is because a lot of kind of like maybe that's just my view. A lot of established players, they've been in the market for so long. They've been, the companies have like strong cash flows. They have like strong products, etc. And but they haven't actually really innovated a lot. Like some of them actually have kept, but more like on a research base rather than actually kind of like releasing things into the market. I mean, IBM is probably an example of that. But
even Google is releasing like papers all the time of lots of cool stuff.
Exactly. Right? And there's all this research from Google that they always have like some academics kind of like work on the top of the game in AI and in other, other areas. But then eventually some of those companies, like especially the older ones, like, IBM, they're no longer cool. So actually the market almost like that that power of the market destruct and reinvent itself presents, oh no, actually the benchmark now is this guy here that, doesn't dresses up like a dude or something. Maybe I think the market is never too extreme. It's like, it's not going to be like this 18-year-old boy that really looks like a boy, but it's more like Sam Altman and guys like this. Actually, they have that almost middle age type of acceptance.
Yeah, it's like I'm older, but I'm still have a young soul.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So they refresh a little bit for those that actually are now kind of like in the later stages of their career. And actually, I think, especially in the United States, with the mentality of, constant, like, especially the Silicon mentality of moving fast and breaking things, they constantly have to have a renewal.
Yeah, to reinvent
the image of like, what is it that the technology and the people actually behind the technology.
And just talking about Sam Altman, he's been putting on Twitter or X. I can't call Twitter X, it's just weird, but he's been putting on Twitter like some clues that Project Strawberry, which is used to be Project Q or whatever, which everyone thinks there's GPT-5, it's probably about to be released. And I think so lots of videos and people that I follow that are like up to date with technology, they've been saying that there is a very likelihood that models that have been put on other places that you can test models were GPT-5, and people had like a first hands-on experimenting and seeing what it does.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing is on maps, of course, but the biggest thing is on reasoning and being able to think ahead of the task.
Okay.
So that's what makes maths and calculations a lot better as well, because then the LLM is actually planning and reasoning on the steps that it's going to take to solve a problem.
Okay. But how is that different from some of the experimentation, for example, like an open source project, right? So AutoGPT, I don't know if you've I did a presentation on AutoGPT to a group of like IT guys like about a year ago, I think now. How is that different? Because I mean that model was still using some of the old models from ChatGPT. I think GPT 3 or 3.5, I suppose at that time. Yeah. And then the LLM was also like based on some Go, it was kind of like planning, kind of like using its own outputs and then trying to reason on questioning itself and then going.
I think the idea is because I think stuff like AutoGPT is more like a chain of prompts. It's an automated chain of prompts, but it's a chain of prompts. So the LLM gives a result based on the most probable tokens for the answer, and on the result it takes to the next step on asking another question.
Yep.
As reasoning is more around when you ask a question, the LLM plan ahead before giving the answer, and then on the planning questions itself. So it's like you playing a chess game and thinking of future moves before you make the move. That's a next step for AGI, like making LLMs think a little bit more like humans. Because right now, if you ask the LLM a question, you get an answer and that's it. And you can ask the LLM to sort of verify its answer or ask a question over that answer to generate another answer.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as thinking of the steps to come back to the answer, because you're already giving the answer straight away. You know what I mean?
But it wouldn't actually make it almost like if he embeds a chain of prompts.
In a way, yes. Imagine when you're doing something, right? Like when you go and do something, you think about that thing that you're gonna do. You think about the possible problems and ways that you can go before you make the decision of, that's the line of thinking that I'm gonna take, and you start thinking on that.
That's assuming that we're humans that think, right?
Yeah.
So which it is actually a challenge, challengeable kind of assumption nowadays. But I get
because it's easier just consuming shit on my phone or on screens and not putting my brain to work.
Well, the machines are learning.
The machines are learning with us, with our stupidity. So they become smarter or dumber. But that's sort of the idea.
Okay. And when is that supposed to be kind of like?
Well, he's been giving hints that it's probably going to come out. But the thing with OpenAI right now that really upsets me is they show something and it takes so long to come out. They create so many, I don't know if it's resistance or if they showed too early, but then other people just start developing, like Sora, right? They showed Sora, I don't know how many months ago. Lots of other companies are giving the same results of what we saw initially from Sora, and Sora is still not live. And the same thing like with the speech. I know they started rolling out to trusted testers or whatever they call. I haven't seen it working on my hands yet. It's something that I would love to, but it's like it takes too long.
But
Like they show something and they wait so long that other companies just go and build their own things.
But couldn't actually that be a strategy from their side to kind of like say, let's give a teaser to the market, and then
Is that to push the market to see how?
and then the market actually goes crazy. Some startups kind of like raise an incredible amount of money, kind of like build those LLMs faster, test if there's any user, and then actually OpenAI say like, yeah, actually, thanks guys for doing all the work for us, seeing the features that actually work, those that are not, and then we go and release our thing. I mean, traditional companies do.
And because they are working in parallel, when they release, it's probably going to be a lot better than what they showed, and people are
exactly because
working
they're capturing a little bit like the feedback from the market before actually they go.
Yeah, it could be.
I don't know. I mean, again, I'm completely speculating here on the way, because I've seen a pattern like this operating in some bigger players where they actually go later in the market, but they kind of like they test by proxy, if you will, the market. Actually, the others do. And then they say, yeah, actually, these users there, there's people consuming all that kind of stuff. And then let's now go and do it ourselves.
Yeah, it could be. In the VC world, what are you seeing sort of in this zone of AI? Like, is that still really hot and lots of projects coming up, or do you see the wave sort of starting to break and some of the hype going away? What's your view right now?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of like a mix there. So for the very, very early stage, startups, VCs are still, allocating and throwing money at some projects, and sometimes kind of like significant sums of it into the AI space, and some of the combinations of AI with other tech. I mean, Web3 being one of them, but also AI and IoT and so on. Like for the
gaming, crypto,
gaming is definitely a big one, and depends on the market. It will even be extrapolated. Like think about Japan and South Korea and markets like this. They tend to go actually quite crazy when it comes to those to that type of tech.
So what about VR? Is that still in the game?
I'm not following too much kind of like the VR space lately, so I'm not quite sure. But yeah, AI is definitely is still hot. I think like on that kind of like more early stage part of the market, in the more kind of corporate part of the market, there are some kind of signs of people being a little bit more doubtful. I think because a lot of now when was chat like the version 3 of GPT release?
3.5 was November 2022, I think.
2022, yeah. So like I think like almost 2 years on. Now a lot of companies are like, okay, guys, we've done a bunch of POC. We've integrated some pieces of it, but hey, this is still not bringing the revenue that you expect relative to the CapEx or like the infrastructure that they are putting on place, right? Because it's actually costly to put those things in place for a traditional company that is already well established. It's quite costly for them actually to do that. But actually on the other side, is that already bringing the revenue that they expected or they were actually promised? A lot of them actually.
I think they were all thinking like, once we've got AI, we can get rid of like 20% of our workforce, which is not the truth. Like I think working AI, so I've been working AI for quite a long time now, and I can see that it does add value, makes people more efficient, faster, but we should be using this as a way to advance our productivity more than saving costs. Like
I agree.
Because if we think about like the traditional company in the last few years, there's lots of stats on countries like US, New Zealand, Australia, whatever. Everyone has been losing a lot of productivity. So I think AI might be there to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, if you see a lot of like developed countries, actually productivity has been going down for quite a while now, like, pretty much like decades with very few exceptions across the developed world. in part because of aging population. That's part of it, because, an aging population, that means that actually as people actually get older, they train maybe a little bit less, they are set on their ways of doing things, whatever the reason is. But I think there's an aspect of it. I agree that, like, in the early days, I saw a lot of people like, oh, I'm scared for my job, and I don't wanna. This AI thing kind of like scares the shit out of me because I'm gonna be replacing things like that. Yeah, I think some aspects of the work might be replaced, but I think on the other way, as most other kind of like general purpose technologies, it's more like about enhancing kind of like some of the capacity of the people that are there, especially in a kind of like a services based kind of economy, right? Where it's a lot of knowledge base. So if you can accelerate the speed with which you acquire knowledge and the speed with which you innovate, you can create new products, digital or actual kind of like manufactured goods that, increase their productivity. But you still need the humans. For now, like to drive that part. You don't eliminate the humans, you just free up their minds from tasks. There probably a lot of people, especially in big companies, they spend a lot of time doing administrative tasks and not actually creating value.
That's very true.
Right.
So I think it's more about not being scared of AI, but being scared of a human that understands AI. Like, if you think who's going to take my job, is someone that knows how to use AI more than AI itself.
Which is not new in itself, right? So, for example,
it's like if you know Excel and someone doesn't, and you work with finance, you've got an advance over that person.
Exactly.
And all the tools, right?
Exactly, right? Like if you say, let's roll back, if we were like in the 1950s, and I don't know, maybe half of the workforce didn't even work, maybe because actually women still were not like in the workforce and all that kind of stuff. I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty incredible that in just 70 years or so, we've added probably 50% more of our workforce, and we have not increased by the same amount the unemployment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you added actually all of this kind of extra capacity of, I mean, more than 50, right? Women make more than 50% of the population.
Yeah.
So added all of the extra capacity and actually serve and actually kind of like have activity for most of those people actually to join that workforce, because you've also trained them. Actually, there's even an argument nowadays, the big argument, actually women are way more productive than men, because all the stats say that, that they are studying longer and they are being more successful. So actually there's a big...
So yeah, be scared of women taking your job.
Yeah, be scared of trained women kind of like, train themselves in AI and taking your blokes' jobs. Then actually it's way more scary than the AI itself.
No, gender equality. We need to be the same, and everyone, if you're good at something, you're good at something. Yeah. But I think just taking on that, there's this thing as well that, as you say, like half of the population, there was lots of reasons like war, men going to war, women having to work. There's lots of history, lots of reasons in history why this had to happen. But if we think about it rationally as well, thinking about productivity, the world has changed a lot from work. The more I work, the more money I make, because that's like the US mentality in the past, right? Like, if I want to be successful, I have to work a lot. I'm going to make a lot of money, and then I've got to have a good life. And that's how it used to be in the past.
Yeah.
But now it's, you've got the balance in your lifestyle, in your family, and people, even if you work more or less, most of the times you don't get compensated for the overwork that you do.
Yeah.
So there is a change in the dynamic as well. So I think there's more people, but like, as you said, less productivity. So maybe those people do make sense to be doubled up to deliver the same as we used to.
I think there's
and the population has grown.
I'll come back to the productivity thing, but like there's a recent interview that I watched with the CEO of Netflix. a great interview that he did on a recent podcast. Like, don't recall it off the top of my head, but one thing I think the thing around like work, and being a workaholic, I think really depends on the life stage, to be honest. And he made a great analogy of how that kind of like the myth of you work harder and you work the longest hours actually equals higher level of financial and professional success. And he was saying like, this is absolutely not true, right? And he used the analogy because of like, he used to travel a long time and take lots of planes in Europe. And he used actually to miss because he was always running in the airport. But also he used to be I think a triathlon, kind of like,
so he was the right person to run from one plane
athlete,
to the other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but you say like the marginal difference that he made between him actually losing the plane and he arriving on time, on every single situation being all sweaty,
Exhausted.
He was actually literally getting into the plane, actually dripping from sweat. From either running because the plane was delayed,
in the meeting, someone just opens the door like
exactly, the guy's always belly, right? So, and he was saying like, actually, like professional life is a little bit more like those swimming competitions, but like big swimming competitions where you have like a crowd of like 500 people, right? You don't have necessarily, the analogy that I was making, like with life is like, you don't necessarily have to actually to swim really hard all the time. But when you start that race and you have 1,000 people on the race, you just want to swim hard the very first kind of like 1,000 meters or something, so that you don't get kicked in the face.
Right.
Because when there is 1,000 people entering into a short kind of like lane
it's
like
like running the marathon, right?
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's kind of like kicking each other, and you're being kicked at base, and you're losing your goggles in the middle, all that kind of stuff. So in the early stages of career, it's a little bit like this. Yeah, you're working more like when you're like in your 20s or something. You're working more so actually you can get that step ahead. But once you're there, then you can swim along.
Yeah.
Right. And he was making the analogy. I said, like, this is a great analogy because you can't sustain the rhythm of a sprint through 40, 50 or whatever number of years you want to actually to spend working in your life, right? But in that very beginning, when you know nothing and you have like a bunch of assumptions about a bunch of things and you have that beginner mind, you just sprint there. And then once okay, but I'm comfortable with this, then you swim and you don't have to sprint the whole time.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that makes sense.
And it's like, and he met lots of people that would just be, swimming along, and then get to a 40, 50 years old, kind of like a burnout or worse, a heart attack or whatever. And then that's it.
Yeah.
You don't swim anymore. You'll not even finish the race.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
I guess
it is true. And people in the past would live around 40 years. So
that makes sense. That's right. Yeah. But anyways, it's an interesting perspective, I think, that sometimes it gets, because over my life, I've actually worked even with people that were a little bit older. They were still kind of in that like rat's race.
Yeah.
And I never felt that, like, sometimes with young kids and sometimes even with grandkids, and so like, how much time do you actually spend with any of those people? Do they actually even love you? Do they actually even know?
And it independently of what you think of afterlife and religion and whatever, it's one life, right? Like, you have to live this life, right? Because when it's over, it's over. There might be a next step afterwards, but it's not the same life. So you need to enjoy this life with the people that you have and make the most of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you.
Yeah. I think there's also, like, that aspect of, if you talk to people that are like older, like, they're, 80 or 90 years old, like most of them like say like, the things that actually I like the most about my life, if they're still, let's say not happy, but like they're content with their life and they think that they have done their bit right? As they fall, as they went through life, a lot of them actually is the connections that they created. Whether, I mean, and I absolutely think there's a purposeful connection, like, like that around work or activities or projects that you have engaged together. I think that's very important. But there's also connections around, for example, play. Like, do I remember all of the plays that I had and the crazy stuff that I built with my kids and the sparkle that I saw in their eyes? This was part of the play. It's a project, right? It's like, I don't know, we built a tower, right? In the weekend, like my boy actually the other day, he built actually a whole kind of costume. Marcus actually just built like a whole costume over the last couple of days, just made of like cartons and all that kind of stuff. The whole thing. And it's like, it was so creative out of only materials that were around the house. And I say like, this is a big awesome, creative kind of like project, like.
And these are the little things in life that you take forward, because the days that you're working, you're probably not going to remember. But let's talk about something a bit more fun.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the market crash. So there was a massive market crash this week. I saw it coming. Warren Buffett sold half of his Apple stocks, and then Japan had that the circuit break, and I sold a lot of my tech stocks just before the line started dipping. So
you panicked sell.
Well, I didn't panic. I was thinking, if I sell it now and it falls down, then I can buy it again in the bottom and just make a bit more money on it.
Did you actually buy in the bottom?
So it's still sort of in the bottom. It hasn't grown much, but I'm still making my mind if this thing is gonna go up or down again. So I haven't bought it yet.
And then by the time you made your mind, it's gonna be too late.
Back to 0-0.
And then it's too late.
0-0 minus fees.
So interesting what happened in the market over last week. So there's quite a few dynamics. Again, not financial advice, guys. It's just like the stuff that I like and that I follow and that I try to educate myself. But there's actually a few kind of like dynamics that drove, like, I think two key ones were around the things that the economists, they call this sham rule, right? So a sham rule is essentially a perception of recession, is an indicator of recession that can happen for the American market here we're talking about, and where essentially a unemployment indicator raises within like recently by, I think it was like 0.5 percentage points or something along those lines. There's an actual move around that. And that is higher than the last 12-month trailing period. And if that indicator is actually that quick, then kind of like that scares a little bit the market. Why? Another thing that actually happened there was that actually at the same time, there was a economic non-farm payrolls actually report that actually came in the US. And that non-farm payroll was actually showing a figure that was actually quite lower than actually the market expectation. Anyways, so that's kind of like one part of the story. The other part of the story, which I find actually it's quite a little bit more interesting, is that Japan has been this kind of sluggish growth, low interest rates, pretty mediocre actually kind of economy for like the last 3 to 4 decades, right? And because of that, essentially Japanese families, they rather put their money or their cash under their sofas and their pillows, literally.
It's because they had that control the inflation on their country for so long, right?
No, they had deflation, right?
Yeah, inflation deflation. Like inflation was always zero or minus or going
Exactly.
negative.
And there was
yeah.
no point for people actually to have.
Which was a strategy that they adopted after the Second World War.
Well, they kind of like suffered from it also. Like
yeah, they did, but they thought it was a good strategy, and it was for a while.
They made some,
but they hold to it for too long.
They made some pretty pretty big mistakes in terms of like monetary policy and how they manage their economy, over the last few decades. But anyway, so what happened there is that the Japanese, the Central Bank of Japan decided to do something completely the opposite of what the whole world is doing. And it started because of their inflation activity that has returned over the last little while. They actually decided to raise rates. And now everybody is either kind of at the top of their rate hike or is decreasing, like the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, the European Central Bank, etc. They all have kind of like lowered their rates. In the United States is expected probably to start lowering from the next FOMC.
Yeah, but Japan was already low, like zero.
Yeah, so but that's the thing. Because of that and the expectation that all the traders actually used to borrow Japanese dollars in the market, because they said like, yeah, anyways, there's no, I borrow this for zero money. They used to borrow Japanese dollar, Japanese yen, and actually invest into the US dollar, into US markets.
But what about the money conversion?
Well, they are borrowing for zero. It's like institutions, right? We're talking about big players, right?
Yeah,
borrowing a lot of money.
So let's say you're borrowing a lot of yens, converting those yens to dollars, and then investing in the market, and you have zero interest. So you making money with zero money.
Exactly.
But what about the exchange rates? Doesn't the exchange rates can impact?
But that's the thing. The exchange rate, it was also quite stale. In a sense, it was actually quite stable for a long time. And because of that rate hike, of course, now actually the Japanese yen actually becomes more attractive, because for the first time in 30 years or something like that, their interest rates is starting actually to rise again. So actually people start actually putting money back into yen. So actually the exchange rate then actually between the yen and the dollar kind of started fluctuating towards actually the yen. So all of those people that had locked trades and locked borrowing positions from yen to invest into the US markets started actually losing money. And that's what we call
not making as much.
Not making as much money. So, and that's one of the big reasons of the crash. It was because they were literally, billions to trillions of dollars of actually locked money into what we call that carry trade between the Japanese yen and the US dollar. And they were invested into the US market. So actually, once that kind of, went out of sync with what the market has been expecting for the last 20 years or so, then all of those positions that were locked in, they had actually to be wound down. So
there are signs of recovery in the stock market. I've been following the main stocks that I follow, and they sort of been giving signs of hyping up again.
Yeah.
What's your feeling? Do you feel it's going to go down again? Do you feel it's going to just go back to where it was before this week?
Yeah. So
I have a feeling that it's going to fall again, but I can't back up my feeling as with facts.
Yeah, no. So they use a few, I guess, indicators that are outside of the stock market. I think, nowadays, when you look at credit markets, you get a much better kind of almost forward-looking understanding of what might actually happen in equity.
Mm-hmm.
So a clear indicator that is now actually being quite volatile for the last little while is US bonds, both short term and actually longer term.
Yeah, I think Warren Buffett has put more money on bonds than the US government has.
A lot of people are locking
Treasury.
A lot of people are locking now because they see. And they're locking in what we call in duration as well. So it means duration means as you're short term when you buy government securities, when you're short term, it's traditionally, quite stable because you know more or less that direction of interest rate in the market, unless you start pricing things in, etc. Anyways, I won't bother people with that kind of stuff. But as you go longer in duration, start actually buying, yields that are
3 years,
2, 5, 10, 20, 30 years old, because actually the United States do issue things through all of the duration, even beyond 10 years.
Okay.
They go all the way to 30 years, actually, bond issuances and stuff like that. So as you go towards the longer durations, the bond market actually start operating much like equity markets. And at the moment, is actually fluctuating significantly. So you can see like what you call like 20 basis point volatility in yields. For people, it's like 20 basis points is 0.2%. It's nothing. But in the credit market, that's a huge movement of money, because the credit markets are like 3 to 5 times bigger than the whole stock market.
Right.
They are much, much bigger pools of money actually kind of flowing in that market, because they're highly liquid and they are backed by the faith of government, and they're the least, we call them for a reason risk-free rate markets, right? Especially short-term.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a reason. So investors, when they actually get scared, you see significant volumes actually going to that market, because people are taking money away from
the stocks might still volatile for a little bit longer.
Might be.
That's my feeling as well. And you see, like, when you see the big investors taking their money away and putting their money in bonds and secure sort of investments, that's a pretty good sign that something is about to happen, or they're not too comfortable with where we are at the moment. And there's a bit of a tech bubble and all these other things that we know that are going on at the moment as well.
I think there's a few dynamics there. Like there's one dynamic that I think is playing out is also people kind of like locking their base return rate, if you will. Like what I mean by that is that if I expect that the central bank now or in the near future is going to start actually reducing interest rates, and it's clearly the trend from now on. So I don't think, we battled with inflation. Now we started kind of like being a little bit more worried about growth and so on. So if people say, well, if I can lock in a 3 rate of return at 4 or 5%, that is pretty good on the long-term average, meaning that my inflation will be on average of 1 to 2% eventually. That's a 4% kind of risk return that you have adjusted actually.
If you have a lot of money, then that's a really good idea.
If you have significant amount pockets of money, allocating a portion of the portfolio in there locks a minimum 5% for you for the next 5 to 10 years. That means that for everybody that is going to be offering you anything, thinking here about like a wholesale kind of big pockets, right? Anybody that will offer you anything, the minimum that you're going to ask them is 5%.
Yeah,
because why would you take more risk than the 5% that you're getting actually from a government-backed security?
Yeah.
Right? So,
and a stock, depending on who you're investing in, how the market is, like for, let's say, stable company to grow 5%, that can take like, depending on the company, from 6 months to a year or even more, right? Earlier companies grow at a much faster rate. Earlier companies, right? Yes, but
established player actually kind of making double digits.
Because if you think about security you want on companies that are financially secure and stable. So you're probably going to go to something like a big company. But then if you say, okay, I have a risk-free here, 5%, or I have a thing that I might get up to 5 or 10 if I'm lucky on a year.
Yeah,
it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, you're gonna wait out whether actually that extra risk that you're taking is worth for the money that you have. That actually,
but I don't know if is that good, like taking the money away from the market, because you also want the market to grow. And
of course, and you don't want to put all of that money just funding actually public debt.
Yes.
So actually, there is some of it that actually needs to be done, because you still want to have like good schools and good roads,
and pay all the COVID debts.
and pay the COVID, the COVID, exuberance and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you do have like a big aspect of it that you say, like, I want still actually put that into. I mean, that's my belief that the private sector will still deliver something of a higher value overall to the society than putting a bunch of money actually to the government actually to manage, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in some aspects, I think government will actually manage things well, but not in every aspect. And you still want to have the private sector actually being well funded actually to keep producing, goods and
but you know what? With all the problems in the world, all the eyes are now in the Olympics. So nobody cares with anything that is going on. Stock market crashing is going to be forgotten in a few days with some more golden medals. So nobody cares. And all the eyes are in France now, who is making tons of money with all those people spending their good, sweaty money in their countries.
And
but I don't know if they know how to deal with money very well in France, which is another question. Yeah. But Olympics are crazy. And you were telling me a story just before we started recording about some crazier Olympics. What was that deal? I asked you to hold, so you tell me now.
Yeah. So I was thinking about, like, what are the weirdest or like craziest sports that are now part of the Olympics, right? And I've watched a few. I mean, I haven't watched actually full kind of Olympic games. I've watched mostly the kind of like highlights of some activities that actually happened across the fall. And I was the other day, I was actually watching this rock climbing competitions that actually are going on at the Olympics, and I said, like, and I saw these dudes actually, they actually have a race, but it's actually a vertical race, and they call it speed climbing.
Okay, so who can climb the fastest?
Who can climb the fastest? I think the wall has about 20 meters. So just imagine what 20 meters is. Like, I was talking actually to my kids this morning, and they're saying, like, what is 20 meters? And it's like, I don't know. And I said, like, our house, the size of our house, and like we have like a two-story house. Our house is about 5 meters high, right? So imagine that the wall that those kids are climbing is about 4 times actually the size of our house. Yeah, like you stack up your house like 4 times.
That is crazy.
Do you have any idea how long those guys actually, the good guys that are competing in those speed climbing competitions, they take?
I have no idea.
Give me a number.
5 minutes.
No, not even close.
2 minutes.
5 seconds.
5 seconds.
5 seconds. They're like Spider-Man. These guys are literally like
20 meters in 5 seconds.
20 meters on a vertical rock climbing in 5 seconds. I think someone broke, I think it was maybe
broke
in
the
Indonesia.
record, but when did the record start?
Yeah, so I don't know for how long they've been doing these competitions. I haven't looked that up, but there was, I think it was an Indonesian guy, or an American. I don't know. I don't know for sure. There was this guy that actually broke the record and was I think it was the world record. I think it was 4 seconds, 0.75. How do you call it? Like cents of second? Anyway, 4.75 milliseconds, whatever the unit is used there. And I was like, fuck, these guys are like literally like Spider-Man on a wall. When you watch it, it's so fun.
Are they just like normal climbing, or are they like sort of jumping? Like
no, it's a competition.
Pulling their body up and jumping from one.
No, there's 2 guys or 2 girls. There's both men and women actually that competed that. The women,
but not together, like separate.
No, separate categories. And then the women and the men, the athletes, they essentially are given like, a trigger or something like this, and then actually they have to climb up the wall.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's like the ready, set, go.
The fastest one, and then they have all the heats, and then they have like the quarterfinals, semifinals, final, etc. And then they have the medalists. But everything is about the heat. So you have actually kind of like athletes that sometimes mid-wall, they slip up and then actually they lose their track and that's it, that they are over disqualified. And then you have like this crazy Spider-Man.
I haven't watched this.
They're like, it's so cool.
I've been seeing the boring, like not the boring, the normal stuff, like the races, the swimming and the X-throwing and, you know, like the normal stuff. But yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
This is really cool.
And surfing was good, and skateboarding, like those are sports that I like seeing on the Olympics.
Yeah, what kind of like sports did you find like the most interesting or
the most exciting or interesting?
Yeah, weird, exciting. Yeah.
So exciting, I like surfing, skateboarding, and I think it's they're exciting to watch because you're seeing people do cool stuff.
Yeah.
Races are nice just because of that feeling of anxiety of who's gonna win. If you
mean like athletics?
Yeah, like athletics or the gymnastics. I like. It's quite amazing to see what some of those girls do. Like that's just impossible. Like I can't do half of that with my body, or even 20%. So that's. But thinking about like sort of weirdest, like stuff like those what they call like the ones with horses and shit like that. It's so boring to watch, man.
Oh, equestrian. Yeah.
That's so boring to. I was watching one the other day, like, Jesus Christ, how can someone be on the audience watching that thing for the whole day?
Yeah. There's I think one that I liked actually watching a few highlights was hockey.
Yeah, hockey is nice.
Hockey is cool. It's like it's probably like a sport that I would like actually to keep to pick up at some point.
Yeah,
you know,
I used to play hockey in the past,
but actually kind of like hockey on grass,
hockey.
Ice hockey. Okay, yeah.
Well, inline hockey, and then some of ice hockey, but inline is just instead of using playing the ice, you play on indoors, and then you use like a inline skate.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But you don't. But have you played actually the hockey where you're actually walking or running around?
The grass hockey or whatever it's called. No, I haven't played that.
Yeah, it's actually quite cool. There was actually a lot of competition there on hockey, and I found the games were generally actually quite tight. So it's not like big scores. It's like 2-1 or 3-0 or something like this, but it's not like crazy
like football used to be in the past.
Yeah, like football used to be.
Yeah.
You know, so but anyways, like this is just like normal competition. I think the craziest thing, and maybe we can wrap it up after that, is what if competitions could be done, but you had absolutely no limits. Like as an athlete, you can take as many drugs as you want. You can take all steroids. You can be a cyborg.
Have AI in your brain.
Yeah, you can do anything.
You can use mech clothes and be like a massive robot, like those Japanese mechas.
Would you watch a competition like
this? That would be so fun to watch.
Man, so
I don't know if we would see people dying because of the drugs that they take, but that's probably another problem, right?
But this is something that you should then
like someone taking so much steroids that when they running, like they
have like a heart attack.
No, they heart burst or they have a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. That would be fucked up.
So there's this mate of mine that he told me that there are literally some Silicon Valley billionaires, I believe like Peter Thiel and some guys like this, they are actually sponsoring an enhanced Olympic Games.
That's crazy.
And essentially the basic rule is there's no rooms. So, and they want...
Is cheating allowed?
I don't know about that, but it's like essentially the idea behind it is that they want to test the limits of humanity and whatever you want to call humanity.
Okay, so the human body, taking the human body to the next level.
To the next level. Yeah. If you want to enhance it with drugs, go for it if you want
So
to
if you wanna fight like boxing and you became like Jax from Mortal Kombat with the metal arms, you
metal
can do
arm, yeah. Or if you watch way too much kind of like television and you have seen all of those superheroes and you want to become one and then participate in the Olympics games, go for it.
Go for it.
There are no rules.
Oh, that's crazy.
So I think it's upcoming.
It's not gonna go right.
Yeah,
they're gonna have to have some basic rules.
I suppose the guys that must be making all sorts of disclaimers around, you know, personal liability or whatever. It's like, you know,
it's
if you die midway, we take no ownership.
It sounds like a Japanese anime or cartoon, like with like there was one that I was watching on Netflix and I just forgot the name, but it's like they have the biggest companies in Japan, and to know who's gonna sort of rule Japan and win deals and shit, they pay to have fighters, and then those fighters go into a competition, and the fighter that wins means that the other companies will open up for that company to do the something they beating there.
Yeah.
And then they go to those competitions that are like life or death and shit like that.
Yeah.
And then you have the fighters that go all the way to the end. So it's becoming like, this is becoming reality.
This is becoming reality. It used to be the stories of science fiction. Next time, maybe I'll talk to you about actually a book that I'm reading at the moment. It's a sci-fi book, but Master of Games. Amazing. But anyways, I'll leave that as a topic for next time that we meet up, and then and then
awesome.
Yeah.
If you stayed all the way to the end, leave some comments. Maybe we'll read your comments next time, or even talk about it and bring it up for discussion. And thank you very much.
And see you guys in the next lunch and chat session.
Yeah, lunch and chat.